Welcome back to my studio. My name's Rick Manners. I'm going to give a little talk this morning, a little bit about the history of where I've come from and the things I've done in the past. And the best way to start any story is at the beginning. And November 11th, 1957 was a very important date for this young lady because right there was me. And I've always been creative all my life. People say I must have been born with a crayon on my hand. And hang on, let's check. Yeah, I was. There it is. But as a child, I loved to draw. My parents always allowed me to be creative and to do all kinds of drawings and paintings, anything that was productive. And even before I was in kindergarten, I was drawing things that my mind knew exactly what they were. My mother had to label them. This is a boat and a kite and a garbage can and some apples. But I loved cartoons. I loved copying cartoons out of the newspaper, and I even drew my own cartoon characters as well. So I had a pencil or a crayon or marker in my hand all the time when I was a kid. And one of the things I loved was automobiles. And I used to draw my own cartoon cars and design them, take my model kits. And I would actually take the models and build custom cars from my drawings. So taking different parts and combining them together. And we actually built a scale replica drag strip, which my friends from around the neighborhood would bring their model cars, and we actually had races down the drag strip with little motorized strings. And I love to draw. So this was a design I did for the Blue Flame car that I started when I was 9, 10 years old and finally finished at 60 years of age. And this was the original drawing that I did of the Blue Flame. But here's the model contest from the Woolworths store. And that's me on the far left and my older brother Dave in the dead center. And that was me, but I loved building models when I was a kid, and that was sort of the hand-and-eye coordination that taught me to be an artist. And one of the things I also loved as a child was music, and this was my first electric guitar that I got at one Christmas. And my father taught me to play guitar when I was 4 years old. I took his acoustic guitar, and he taught me the basic chords, and I've played basically all my life. But music has been just as important an aspect of my life as being an artist. And in public school, I had the unique opportunity of meeting a new boy that had come into class, and his name was Gary Thompson. And from that moment on, we struck up a lifetime friendship and had been together all our lives. And here's the two of us had a Rush concert just recently, and my good buddy has recently passed away, and I miss him dearly. But entering high school was really quite unique because I'd never really taken any art classes other than in high school. And they taught you the basic drawing and painting techniques, and I took it very easily. And this was actually a mural that I did in the art room in the tech wing, painted right onto the wall. They asked a couple of the higher students if they'd like to decorate the inside of the art class, and that's the one I did. And I was also into athletics. I joined the wrestling club when I was in grade 9, and that's me right there, little skinny little kid with the long hair, and eventually worked my way up to be the MVP for the team when I was in grade 12 and won the MVP award in high school. I also did a lot of gymnastics. And so that was myself right there and on the gymnastics team, and I think that was grade 10 the following year. But the unique part about that, my older brother Dave was also on the same team, and our coach, Mr. Paul Roach, was our coach. And the unique part about that was 45 years later, he ends up working for me at the local benevolent fund, and that's Paul in the center and Dave and myself 45 years later. I also took up scuba diving, and I got my skin diving and my scuba diving certificate when I was in high school, and actually ended up going down south with a bunch of my buddies, and we went scuba diving, and I just loved being able to do that. I was also the top winner of the welding award. Welding was one of the unique things that I loved to do when I was in high school, and I actually won the Superior Arc and Flame Award in grade 12. And so at that time in grade 12, I thought I was going to combine the two occupations, become an underwater welder. That's what I was going to start to do. But one of the things that kept coming to the surface in my life was my music, and I actually built my own recording studio under the stairs at home where I lived with mom and dad. And this was part of my recording studio. And Gary and myself and our other friends would bring our guitars and our amplifiers, and we would make all kinds of music and record what we could do down there. And it was just a lot of fun. And then in grade 12 came along, and I had decided that I was going to pursue um, not the welding aspect of it, but I was going to pursue media arts. And here I am graduating from grade 12. And from there, I went directly into Sheridan College and did 3 years of media arts and a couple of years of animation. and that's me in my first year at Sheridan. And one of the things that they do in your first year is they expose you to all different aspects of media. And one of the things I'd never done before was photography. And as you can see, as I'm getting into the 70s now, the hair gets a lot longer. And at that time in 76, this would have been my first year at Sheridan College. I met my high school sweetheart, Kathy, and that's our first Volkswagen. And from there, I did a lot of work with animation, which I had never done to do, and I just found it fascinating. And at home, I had to set up my own studio because we did a lot of hours in doing everything. Back in those days, there were no computers. Everything was hand drawn and hand painted cells. And this was a little pencil study that we had to do for one of the classes. So I took a cougar that was jumping and repeated that over and again and had different characters run by, and it was all done in pencil. And I also designed my own characters. This was a little scuba diver because, again, I loved scuba diving at the time. And we also did three-dimensional claymation animation as well. And so this was a little 8mm film that we had to do. So we had to do different techniques of panning the camera and working. So I had these two little characters that I designed out of plasticine that were going to fight over this flower that popped up on my sofa. And there's my two characters, and they're arguing about the flower, who owns it. And I also kept fairly fit as well, and still lifted a lot of weights and did a lot of exercising. And actually, because of that, I took my older brother and I had to do a 16mm animation film, and this was over 3,000 hand painted cells, and I used him as a model in the gym. And again, photography was a very important aspect in what I was doing at Sheridan. So here I am on graduation day with my high school sweetheart in one arm and my college diploma in the other, and I donned my business clothes on to go on and take on the world. And I got hired immediately by Adventure Communications, which was an ad agency in Toronto, and they had been watching for the graduating students, and I got asked to apply to this company and eventually work my way up to be production manager for their audiovisual division of the company. And here I am operating one of the multi-million-dollar animation cameras. And my job was to design all the special effects animation sequences, special effects images for clients all over the world. We traveled everywhere and did high profile clients like Mazda and Black & Decker and Texaco. And we were one of the first companies to actually use multi-image animation in a television commercial. And here's the actual proto layout for that commercial of the Mazda B2000 pickup truck. And that was quite unique that we were the first company to ever use multi-image projection in animation for an actual 30-second television commercial. And it was quite remarkable at the time. And here's a billboard that we did for the Don Valley Parkway, and that's actually me on the far left standing through the sunroof of my 1970 Volkswagen Beetle. And it wasn't long after I joined the company that we had made our first $1 million, and this was a little plaque that we made for the president. So in '79, I took my high school sweetheart, and she became my wife. But one lunch hour when I was in advertising, I was going down Yonge Street, and I stopped at this little bookstore to pick something up, and I saw this children's book called A Family from Minerva. And that image of the snowy owl just fascinated me because I loved wildlife all of my life. And it was actually written by a lady called Kay McKeever. Kay and her husband Larry had a owl rehabilitation center in Vineland. And it wasn't long that I realized that that little book sort of spurred my imagination, and that later in life our paths would cross again, and she would be such an influence on my work as an artist. And this was my office. So after I got back from that bookstore on Yonge Street, I picked up a pencil and I did a quick little sketch of a snowy owl. And that was the first time I had actually done wildlife realism just for the sake of doing it. And I looked at this little sketch and I thought, well, this was quite interesting way of making a living. And I actually had the opportunity to meet this gentleman at the Royal Ontario Museum, and it was one of his shows he was having at the ROM. And I got to meet Robert Bateman, and he was quite an influence on my work as well, and I took part in a couple of his workshops. I also kept fairly fit back then as well. I was into weightlifting, powerlifting, and bodybuilding. This was a competition in Toronto. And physical fitness was still quite important to me at the time. And I actually got into a good friend of mine, Tom Thompson, got me into mountain biking. We actually ended up competing in a couple of the big races as well. And this was one of the Canadian Championship races that we were in. and I ended up getting a prototype Cannondale bike my second year because we did it for 2 years in a row. But something happened that was missing in Kathy and my lives, and we decided to add a new member to our family, and this was Arrow Manners, a little golden retriever that we decided to take into our lives. And I was there the day after he was born, and here he is as a puppy, and he just brought so much joy and love into our lives, and he was the missing link. And it's so unique to have that little bundle of joy. We had no have no children, but he ended up being our child, and it was quite unique to have such a wonderful little critter in our lives. And I can't say much other than I miss him with all my heart, and I know we both do. And here he is at our friend's place. So we were introducing him to some two big Alaskan Malamutes, and he was just one amazing animal. And here he is. Here's the two of us about 12 years apart, and there's our family portrait. And this was the day before he left, and he definitely was pure gold. And it took me 2 years to recover from that. And then we realized that we needed something else in our life. And this little guy we met at a breeder. We wanted to get a collie because the family had had collies all our lives. And we went to meet this breeder. Here was this little 4-month-old guy that was all by himself. And he was one of 10 puppies that the female had had, and 9 of them had perished because she had no milk. And he was the only survivor out of the 10 puppies. And he was in desperate need of a new home. And eventually he came home with us. And this is Solo. And he's been manager of Homeland Security since the day he arrived here, and is quite a unique character. And again, he becomes part of our lives. And of course, my love of wildlife, it never ends. And I would like to definitely thank you folks for listening to my presentation.